And today it'll be a short presentation and then lots of time for Q&A. So if you have questions, just put them in the chat, and the wonderful Kevin is manning the chat, and he's also there to help with technical issues. So if you have any problems, you can just, in the chat, just direct it to Kevin and ask him for help rather than to everyone. So today I'll be presenting from this Canvas course, which you'll get access to afterwards. And I'll be using a range of real examples from online courses that we've developed in partnership, in a co-design partnership with academics. A lot of the examples will be from the Master of Intellectual Property Law, which is taught fully online, and also the Graduate Diploma of Migration Law. So they have some great teaching examples, online teaching examples, and they also get really positive student feedback in the SFS survey. So they're a pretty good example to look at. There are also other ones from a lot of FAST courses. So let's get started. So today's session is about teacher presence and communication. And I guess we'll be looking at communication as a component of teacher presence. So if we're thinking about teacher presence, that's really the atmosphere you create and the way you support student learning in the online space. And I guess the most commonly referenced model which talks about teacher presence is the community of inquiry model, which you might well be familiar with. And in that model, they divide teaching presence up into 3 elements. And there is a little bit of a crossover, but so we're going to look at each of those elements and look at examples of how academics and us as a learning design team have kind of enacted that in courses. So just on the front page of the module, there's a little overview of the elements. And excuse me, I might have to cough. I don't have coronavirus though, I promise. So the design is, I guess, where we start when we're working with an academic, that we look at the design of their subject. So how is it organized? What is the sequence of materials? What kind of activities that punctuate the content? What type of resources are used? How is the context set? So just making everything clear to the students so that the site is very self-explanatory. They know exactly what they have to do. The context is set for everything they do. They're guided through the course with teacher talk. There's opportunity to interact with the content and their peers and the teacher. So it's just planning that space. So what kind of space are you going to plan? And then just as an overview, facilitation is, this is more your active kind of encouraging students to engage with the course and the content and each other. So it's setting the climate. So that's things like providing encouragement and acknowledgement, participating in discussions, and even non-verbal signals like liking people's posts, and helping to kind of create a sense of consensus or clarify any conflict or confusion. And I guess a lot of this, we'll look at some really great examples from academics. Being your authentic self is a huge part of that, so students can feel a connection to you and create that rapport in the classroom. So things like using a friendly tone and the active voice, name checking students, participating in an introduction forum yourself and allowing students to see who you really are. Things like communicating regularly through announcements, relating it back to your own experience, and warmth and humour are really important to create that safe and welcoming space. And then finally, direct instruction is the part where you do your kind of teaching of the discipline matter. So that's thinking about how you deliver your content and activities. So you might choose different modes of delivery. You might want to chunk up your content and intersperse it with activities so students don't get overwhelmed with a wall of text. And a lot of that would also be moderating discussion, so getting in there and helping to clarify or guide students in a discussion. And importantly, this is where feedback comes in. So that's a really critical part of teaching in the online space, or teaching in general. So building in those opportunities for feedback and actively giving feedback to students that's meaningful and useful. So let's take a look at preparing and planning your online course. So this is the design. So although you might have created your course site for face-to-face instruction, I think with a few little tweaks, you can move it to more of an online learning environment. So I guess one of the things when you're planning your site is moving away from that idea of your LMS being just a repository where you guide students to get a PDF or a file. So when we work with an academic, we think about creating a whole learning and teaching sequence and how students move through that and how we guide them through that. So there are a few things that can help students to understand how the course works. And because I'm using Canvas examples, or I'm using Canvas examples, but that doesn't mean that this can't be done in Blackboard or in another system. So one of the things that we do at the postgraduate learning design team is when we get a subject, rather than using an arbitrary weekly structure, which doesn't really give students a sense of the context or how things relate to each other or how it relates to assessment, we actually divide the subject into modules. And I think that really helps students to get a sense of what each module is doing, what they're going to get out of it, and how this is going to relate to their assessment and out into the real world. So I guess some guiding questions are, what do you want them to learn in this module? How's it linked to the subject learning outcomes? How will they demonstrate their learning? And what assignments and learning activities will support the learning? So I thought we'd take a look at a few examples. So after we've divided a subject into modules, and then we build the subject in Canvas, we always have a module overview for every module, which gives students a clear understanding of what this module is about, what's expected from them, and what they'll get from it, so what they'll be able to do at the end of it. So this is an example from an advanced journalism subject. So, and this module overview page can be tailored to suit what you want to communicate, but it's important that it lets them know what the area, the topic is, what they'll be able to do by the end of it, and also the type of activities that they'll have to do to complete the module. So that's an example from advanced journalism. And this is an example from international and intercultural communication. So you can see that they're slightly different, but what we have in both of them is an image that kind of conveys the theme, a little overview about what they're going to be looking at, the areas they're going to be looking at, and kind of like mini learning outcomes. So the learning outcomes for that module. So they're clear about what they're going to get from the end of it. And then also what kind of activities are they expected to do. And so the module begins with the module overview and it ends with the module summary. And the module summary is an opportunity for students to recap what they've learnt and also encourage them to reflect on how they feel about whether they have met the learning outcomes or how confident they feel. So a nice example of that is from a podcasting course. Actually, that's the wrong heading. It's not, it's from arguments, evidence and intuition. So it's looking at how they went with the outcomes, so applying their CRAP test and working with big numbers, and an opportunity to reflect. And this comment box here is anonymous, but students post in there and they'll be able to see what other students got out of it. So again, creating that peer learning and that social element. And when we have weekly classes or the subject is taught on a weekly schedule, we can punctuate the module with a weekly brief that just gives students a clear indication of what this week is about, what they're going to be focusing on, and what they're expected to do. So we have a couple of examples here. So we can have a weekly roadmap or a weekly brief. So it's often we have this structure. So before class, you need to do this. During class, or anything you want them to bring or they need to prepare. And then some after class activities. So how they're going to consolidate their learning. And also, is there an assessment task due? That's an example from a communication subject. And this is from a media production subject. So you can see they're slightly different, but they just let students, so students know where to go to find out what's on this week. So they feel very supported about what's happening and what's expected of them. And that's part of that. Your presence is immediately visible when you've got all of this communication guiding students through the course. And one of the things that we're very keen on in the postgraduate learning design team is teacher talk. So often, I guess, if you're coming from a Blackboard site where you've just kind of put your files, there's not a lot of talk kind of guiding the student through the subject. So moving to the online space, instead of planning your lessons, I guess what you're planning in this element of the teacher presence is how students will move through that site. So the kind of things that you might say to them in the classroom need to be put into the online site, guiding students through the activities and resources and concepts. So we've got a bit of an example here from a podcasting course. So it's the tone is really important. So that's one of the key elements of the teacher presence, is using a friendly and approachable tone and using an active voice. So you're talking directly to the students as you would if you were in the classroom with them. And so it kind of sets a bit of context, tells them why they're looking at the concept or the activity, and it guides them through the learning sequence so that they know exactly, they're linking each page and activity to each other and moving them through in a friendly and guided way. And designing the learning activities, so making sure that students, when you're planning your course, that students don't just have a whole series of content and then maybe a quiz at the end of it, but that the activities are interspersed throughout the content. So if you have a bit of content, then there's an opportunity to apply that content and get some feedback. So designing your learning activities to make sure students have the opportunity to engage meaningfully with the content and get feedback. So we have a lot of little tools, and if you're in Canvas, there are a lot of these tools you can use yourself. Some of them, this one is a little polling tool. So this learning activity gives students the opportunity to kind of test their understanding or their preconceptions and also compare themselves against other students. So it's creating that social presence, but it's a very low stakes activity because it's anonymous and there's no right or wrong answer, but it allows them to kind of get a sense of where they fit in the class. So in this one, they're talking about what they think ethics is. Then it moves on to a little video, short concept video, where Simon Longstaff from the Ethics Centre talks through what ethics is in a really approachable way. And then there's a little check your understanding. So I guess thinking about little activities that help students come to grips with a concept. And another example is, again, a similar kind of thing, a little poll to test students' understanding, a little video, well, setting the context actually with a teacher talk up the top, a couple of polls to test their preconceptions, a bit of a video, short video, and an opportunity to discuss and reflect on the video. So I guess that's quite different maybe from a lot of how a lot of people might use Blackboard. So this is really, it's really an online classroom. So you're deciding the order of activities and guiding students through them. And our learning activity might be on a page, but throughout the whole course, I guess we're very keen on developing a learning and teaching sequence. So what's the arc through the course? Is there a narrative, and how does that move through each module? So really thinking about the order in which things are delivered, so that you might start with a low stakes activity, move to some kind of content, an opportunity to check understanding of the content, and then perhaps a discussion or something a bit more complex, moving through the Bloom's taxonomy. So these are some more examples, similar again. So we're using authentic materials here. So this is a survey from the ABC, and then the students enter their results, and also they get that social aspect where they can see how other students have responded and where they fit in that. And this is a sequence that goes through a module. So this is an example from the Master of Media Production and Industry. So they start off, talking about a single story, and it's about bias and identity. So they watch the video, they reflect a little bit on what their story would be. Then I think Oh yes, sorry, the sequence, this is the first page of the sequence. Then after they've done that, they look at their social class, they move on to the single story, and that's related back to how they got defined by the survey before and how they feel being put into a box. And then they move on to an activity where they download this little identity chart, they fill it in, and they take a photo and they share it to a Padlet here. So it becomes a very social activity. And this also feeds into, this is for a blended course, it feeds into the class that they have, but it could feed into a later activity. I think in this one they take someone's identity chart and turn it into a story, because the subject is all about storytelling. Okay, so that's, I guess, designing, preparing and planning your online course. So that's one element of teacher presence. And I guess that's the first place students are going to get a sense of what your teacher presence is, and by seeing how the course has been designed. Then we'll move on to facilitating online discourse. So this is where you're kind of supporting students to engage with the content and encouraging activity. So I guess there are a few things that we've focused on. So one of them, which we kind of mentioned before, and a lot of them do cross over, is being your authentic self, providing that warm, friendly persona. So we've got some nice examples of announcements that are sent out that have a very friendly tone and make that the rapport between the teacher and the students, and make the make the teacher very approachable. So if you're communicating with students like this in a very friendly way, it means that you're a lot more approachable and they'll feel more comfortable contacting you and participating in the course. This is a really nice example from a migration law subject. So this is, got a little video here, and you'll be able to watch it when you look at the course site, but it's Marina Brazar from Migration Law, who was also a participant on Go Back to Where You Came From Live in Syria. So there's a little bit about her, talking about her background as a refugee, because the subject is refugee and humanitarian visas, I think. So talking about her experience as a refugee, and then her experience as a participant on the show with Jackie Lambie, and how that impacted her own migration law practice. And this was done as an icebreaker in the Get Started module. And because Marina really made herself, or opened herself up and shared who she is with the class, that getting introduction forum became very, very popular. So you can see that all the responses really thanked her for sharing her story with them. And they were able to share their personal experience as well. So I guess opening it up to allowing people to share things that are important to them. And this is a really nice, this is another introduction forum. And I think that's a really important thing if you're going to be teaching online, is to set up a really engaging getting to know you forum, because if you set the tone early with that, then students will continue to be more active in the course site. And this is a really nice one, because if you're in Canvas, you can click on the video, you can upload a video. So Jane Rawlings, a law lecturer, has just done a little welcome video at home. So it's very authentic, it's very natural. And the getting to know you thread was really popular, because people were, most of them are very grateful for her lovely and welcoming video, and it's opened up the space for them to share their own story. And I'm going to have to rush through this, I think. So creating a sense of belonging. So I guess that can be through announcements or discussions where you name check people. So this is really nice. The academic has name checked people and talked about their work. So creating that lively space where the teacher knows who you are, and if you do participate, you can expect to get engagement from the teacher, or they're going to be noticing what you've done. And this one is a really nice, in the migration law subject, there's a lot of peer work and group work. And so Christine encourages people to join a study group so that they can have that peer support. And they're very active. Then I guess in the online space, I did say that we can teach you some tips and tricks so that you're not spending all your time in here. So I guess one of the things is to schedule when you're going to be in the course and let students know. So maybe you send out an announcement every Monday morning, or you send it out every Friday, or you have a Zoom session, an open Q&A Zoom session every Thursday between 2 and 3, or you come in and you moderate this and just summarize the discussion on a Sunday, for example. So students know what to expect. And they know that if they're going to be active in the site, they're not posting into a vacuum, that you're going to be there and you're going to be seeing what they're doing and responding and giving feedback. So you can see this is just some ways that announcements are used. So encouraging and motivating, letting them know when marks have been released, if there's new resources been added, upcoming classes, this feedback survey, and when new content is available. So just keeping that regular channel of communication open so that they know that you are present and engaged. And managing discussions is really important. So there's nothing worse than an online discussion where you post into it and that's it, that's the end of the line. There's no feedback, it doesn't go anywhere. So it's really important that if you're going to expect students to participate in discussions, that you're in there. And it may be just once a week, you might read through all of the discussions and note down the main points, and write a summary post that might clarify any misconceptions, might name check a few students for good answers, and give your perspective on the question that was posed as well. So I know that when I was studying online, and that's how the discussion forums were managed, and I used to look forward to that day every week when the teacher would come in and do that summarising post. And this is another example. So if there's a discussion going on and it needs a bit of clarification, or you want to encourage a few people or compliment a few people on their participation, that's really going to drive engagement in the forums. So I think that's a really important role in facilitating discussion, encouraging students to post and making those forums active and purposeful and useful. And then also, when you're managing discussions, if you can come in and share your personal experience. So this is a cute one from intellectual property law, and Sonal is the tutor. So she's come in and talked about her own personal experience where she had to take over a trademark portfolio suddenly. So sharing that real world experience is also something that's really meaningful for students. And also, I guess, modelling expectations. Oh, that's Marina again. But I guess if you're expecting people to post in the forum, that it's a good idea to do that yourself. That needs to be fixed. And I guess online presence. So sending announcements is good and sending them regularly, but if you have a regular presence in the course, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. So you can just record straight into Canvas, or you can upload a video that you've just shot on your phone, or you can have a little Q&A Zoom session. So for migration law, they have regular Q&A sessions so that everybody knows when the academic will be there and they can come in and just ask any questions that they have. So that's a really nice way in an online forum to have that, maintain that close connection and allow kind of a free space where people can just ask what they want to ask and it's not just teaching. Okay, I think that's it. And then last one, and I'll try to hurry up a bit. So direct instruction, this is kind of where you share your disciplinary knowledge, or you transmit your disciplinary knowledge and you guide students through the learning of the discipline content. So there are a few areas to that. And I guess the most important is feedback. So that's students are crying out for feedback. They really value it. And there are a lot of different ways that you can give student feedback. So this is an example from migration law where she's giving group feedback. So this is really helpful. It's a summary of how they went in the task and the kind of common strengths and weaknesses. So that goes to everybody. But on top of that, this is an example where an academic is just doing a little screencast where he's going through some submitted work and giving feedback on it. So that's a really lovely way of So that's nice, and it's very low tech, so it doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, I think the thing is that students are looking for authenticity and that connection with you. So it doesn't have to have high production values, but just that sense that you're engaged and that you care. And also, one of the other things you can do in an online space to save yourself a bit of time is if you create quizzes, you can program in feedback so that students can do activities and get immediate feedback that's been programmed in. And it's also nice when you program in that feedback, it's not just correct or incorrect, but it explains why they're right, or if they're wrong, what they might need to think about to get that right. And again, using that friendly tone is really encouraging. But I think inbuilt feedback will allow students to have those opportunities to apply and check understanding. And once you've set it up, it might be a bit of work in the beginning, but then it will run itself and it will give them that feedback that they need without requiring anything from you. And also, I guess, thinking about how you're going to deliver your content. So if it's just a long ream of text, that's not very engaging. So try and mix it up a bit. So a bit of text, make a video, you could make it yourself, a screencast, or a little diagram, and also punctuating it with activities so that you're giving students the opportunity to engage with the content. I've got some examples here. So this is from copyright law. So this is a little interactive where you click on it, it has a summary of the different theories. There's a little concept video by the academic, and then afterwards, there's a little quiz to check understanding or summary activity. So there's different ways of presenting the content and mixing it up so it's not just text, 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 text with a quiz at the end, which is quite boring. And this is another example, so using video and polling. And assessment is always the thing that students care about the most. So making very clear the assessment expectations, perhaps making a video that communicates to students what you're looking for. This one goes through the rubric for the assessment task. So students are really clear, they're given a rubric which guides them to how they can achieve a credit or a distinction, and the academic here really encourages them to go for a distinction, because as long as they follow the rubric, they'll be able to do that. So making that really clear. And this is another video about assessment tasks and what's expected. And more videos about assessment tasks. So I think just guiding students, making it clear how to be successful in assessment. And also, as well as having different modes of delivery, thinking about chunking content and using headers and subheaders so that students can clearly see how things relate to each other. And that's not a great example, but on a page, if you have quite a lot of text, if the headers are guiding them through so they can quickly look at the page, scan it and see what the content on the page or what is going to be on this page. And also making it relevant is using authentic materials as much as possible. So relating theory to the real world. So here's an example of some data sets that real life data sets students might use, or case studies that they can apply their learning to. So rather than just theory, that they can actually apply and get practice at doing that. And making connections with the real world. So this is again a copyright law subject, and it's a very interesting one. So the article has come out and we've seen it as an opportunity to look at the elements of copyright and letters and how they are related to copyright. And it's also a very topical issue, which most people would be familiar with. And then again, this is Marina, and go back to where you came from. So this is the real life connection to refugee situation. Okay, I think that's it. So I guess when you're thinking about online delivery, if you're thinking about all those aspects, so how's your course designed? How are you going to facilitate discourse and discussion? And how are you going to teach your content in a way that's engaging and meaningful is kind of the key components. And also, just after this, when you get access to the site, we've got an opportunity for you to share any ideas. So this is quite an interesting link, which has got a lot of stuff about humanizing online teaching. But you can share links here, or you can share ideas. So you can add text. This is a Padlet, and you just go to the pink button and you can add a link, upload a file, a photo or anything. So it'd be great if we turned this site into a bit of a a resource that everybody can use and come back to. So if you have anything good that you'd like to share, please add it there, and I'll also add some more links at the end. And also, there's a discussion forum here. So if you have questions after the session that you want answered, or you might have an idea that you want to share, please post it here. And if anyone else has ideas, please feel free to respond to each other, and we can make it a lively place where people can kind of share their ideas and how things are going. And we'll also keep an eye on it, and hopefully if there are any questions that can't get answered, we can help there. Okay, I'm going to throw it open to questions now, if I can find where they are. There. How do I find the questions, Kevin?
So I'll read out one question that we got a little bit earlier in the session from Angela. So Angela was asking about how different modules, students work through different modules on their own. She understands the subject was set up as online from inception. So how would we apply this for those who are converting to online in a short space of time?
Yeah, so I guess what you need to think about is how you would facilitate that in a class. What is the sequence that you would like students to move through if you were teaching it in a class? Or so rather than just posting a bunch of resources, think about what each resource is, why you want them to read it or look at it, what you want them to do with it, and what you hope to get out of it. So I think adding that teacher talk is something that's a bit of a quick win, but it's your voice that you would normally have in the classroom, but you're putting it on the page. So you're giving the context to why people are looking at things, what they should do with it. Give them an opportunity to interact with the content. You might have a couple of prompts, perhaps, for a video. If you don't have the time to kind of create a discussion forum, you might just prompt them. So while you're watching, look at this and this, or as you read, think about this, and then perhaps you have a discussion after that where people compare their answers. So I think it's looking at your resources, the sequence that you want students to go through them in, and thinking about why you're getting them to do that, and then just communicating that with them, giving them activities around each piece of content. So one of our principles is that I would never have a decent chunk of content without an activity that allows students to engage with the ideas. And also, I guess, if you have those, if you think about how your course naturally divides up, so you might have been teaching on a weekly schedule, but actually often when we meet with academics, they already can see how it divides into modules, and that sets that context so students understand what this module is about and how it relates to it. So if you can think about that and have a bit of an overview to what this module is about, rather than just that weekly thing, that doesn't really give students that bigger picture.
Sasha, I'll mention one other question that's come through from Angela. Angela's asking around copyright, what protocols do we need to follow regarding use of images? Where might Angela be able to find some information on that?
Okay, so there is we'll put a link in the course about images, but there are a few great sites that have free images. So one of my favorites is Unsplash, and we'll put all of these into the course site. So Unsplash has a lot of beautiful images that are copyright free or free to use them. And there are other sites as well but we'll put a bunch of links there. We have a Shutterstock account, but we're lucky. But yeah, so there are a lot of images that you can get from sites like Unsplash.
Fantastic. And one other thing I would add is obviously the library has a lot of resources around how you can copyright and display the copyright appropriately for some images used for educational purposes. So definitely reach out to their team if you have any specifics that you want to be putting into either Canvas or Blackboard, whichever LMS.
And you can email, I think it's copyrightofficer@uts.edu.au, Matthew Noble, and he can help you. But then I guess if you can look at a lot of Creative Commons, and if you're doing an image search in Google, you can use the tools to search for images that allow reuse as well. Or you can look for Creative Commons sites.
Fantastic. Well, if anyone does have any remaining questions, obviously feel free to post them in the chat, but I will also open up if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. I can see that Cleo has a hand up. If anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself now.
Hi, yeah, I thought I'd give it a whirl. I'm Cleo. It's my first time using Zoom. Hi, and even just sitting here, I'm noticing how I feel differently about engaging in in a group discussion. And I was wondering whether you or anyone else in this session has had experiences with this and sort of seeing has a comparison in their mind of how students engage in a kind of online virtual discussion in real time versus in the classroom, and if they have any tips for making that work online. So
yeah. So I think online discussions, as long as students know that they're not just posting into a vacuum, but actually you're going to come in and look at it, and that you encourage kind of students to talk to each other. But it actually frees up people a lot because they have more time to think about their posts and compose them rather than being on the spot in the classroom. So if you put the work in to kind of support that and acknowledge what they're doing, and I think that weekly summary is really valuable, then you know, because when we meet with a lot of academics, they say, oh, no one's going to post in the forum, but then you know, a month later, especially in the online law subjects like the posts, there are, I don't know, 55 posts or something in every discussion. So, but they know it's a valuable discussion because they know the academics are going to be in there. They're going to be able to talk with their peers. So I think just kind of, especially in the beginning, like that introduction forum, if you really kind of get that off to a good start, it sets the kind of expectation and the climate for that participation. And I think there was a workshop on discussions yesterday, and I think that will be run again next week. But thinking about the prompts, relating it back to something interesting or kind of real world a bit, but having a very focused and clear discussion for students and setting the expectations, like how many words they might write, or you know, giving them some bullet points of areas they might cover, so they're really clear about what it is that they're meant to do. Yeah. And I don't know if you're in Canvas, but we have like the more formal discussions, which is like this one that goes on my screen now. Or we also have comment boxes, which is more like an experience you might have on the internet, and you can build them yourself. So you might have a bit of content, and then you can just have a comment box underneath, so that it's more, there's less of a barrier to entry to that because it's lower stakes. It's more similar to an experience you might have on the internet. And also polling, using that allows students to kind of, they're just more low stakes activities, and then it kind of builds them up to a more formal discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I can see as well in the chat that Chris has also made mention to an example of how he used Teams as a way of chatting with students for a class on Monday. Chris, if you wanted to add anything, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. Otherwise, everyone can see what you've written in the chat as well.
Hopefully you can see me. But basically what we found was that a lot of international students didn't want to engage at all. So the trick is to actually, like you do in a lecture or tutorial, is you actually point out to the student directly. You point to a student and ask them their opinion. Well, in a virtual chat, you can do that. You can actually unmute the individual student and say, hey, Xian, what do you think of X, Y, Z? Or what, you have any comments to add, and so on. So it did make the students more aware that they need to engage.
Yeah, that they can't just kind of hide.
They can't just hide, basically.
Yeah. And I also think sometimes, like in a online webinar like this, it is quite daunting to be the person who's speaking. And I think it takes a little while for people to warm up and get used to it. But using the chat like we are now is also another low stakes way to kind of seed that interaction, because it's quite safe. But I guess it's going to take a while to kind of get students used to this new world. And I think just as if you started off, set the tone with your introduction forum, and just really kind of nurture it like you're watering, you know, you're feeding your garden in the beginning to just kind of get it growing. And then also I think that one of the things is that they say the stats about participation online is that, you know, maybe 5% participate. I think you'll get more than that. But everybody else is lurking there, watching what everyone else says. So although you may feel at times that no one's looking at your discussion, no one's doing anything, well, a few people post, but often I show the analytics to academics to show how many people have looked at that discussion forum or how many people are in the site when they think it's empty. So make that discussion forum valuable by being in there and name checking and that kind of thing. And yeah, asking students to elaborate or compare their ideas with someone else. So treat it like it's a discussion in class. Yeah, and you could have a, that's what they do in migration law, is they have a little practice Zoom session in preparation week. So it's not a class, it's just a little session to kind of practice and orient them to the subject. So it's very low stakes. So you might start off with a little, everybody let's practice Zoom, download your Zoom and get on. And Ariane suggests recording a welcome video. Ah, it's an interesting one. For the students to record a welcome video. That's nice, they can do it in the discussion. So like the academic did in migration law, she just recorded her introduction into the discussion to model that expectation for others. You can encourage students to do that. I do think that's kind of maybe a bit of a big ask in the very beginning. Any other questions?
So as the last few questions do come through, obviously we're going to be here until 11:30, and you can obviously stick around and we can answer any of your questions in a smaller context. But if there aren't any more questions, I'll hand back to Sasha, who with myself will be sticking around after as well.
Yeah, so thanks for coming, everyone. We'll be running this session again next week, and I think we've got more sessions coming too. I think there's going to be a groups, working with groups tomorrow.
I've got a question. And
yep.
Sorry, I just, I have to go to another meeting at 11:30. So
yep.
If there's no more questions, sorry, Kevin explained that you were trying to keep it focused. But as an expert in delivery, I'm just wondering if you've got any tips on how you'd suggest we might manage the chat function at the same time as delivering content.
In Zoom?
Yeah, because I'm
I'm not the Zoom expert. Kevin and Emily are, and they are running a session at 12 today about teaching in Zoom. Is that right, Kevin? And that will be on again soon.
Okay.
Yeah, so that particular session we have at 12 today, and I can let you know that the clinic, so it's clinic number 3, Zoom for live sessions, will also be run on Thursday the 26th at 10:30. A lot to unpack in that question, and I really do value it, and we understand that obviously academics are just one person trying to lead a large class, but we'll be going through some of the ways that you can set up rapport with students and boundaries about how you use the chat when you're using Zoom online.
So I'm just very aware that this is a very different form of teaching and learning. And in the space of this one session, I've already had to facilitate and, deal with phone messages, the chat function, looking at the video of Sasha and trying to get the content. So that's a lot going on. So I just was hoping that maybe Sasha might provide personal insight on some experience to help us move from face-to-face to online. But yeah, really appreciate what you've provided. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. I think practice makes perfect too with Zoom. Like it's a bit tricky in the beginning, but the more you do it, the better you'll get. But I do recommend Kevin and Emily's session.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. And Jochen, which additional tools? So Jochen, I don't know if you know, but H5P is now integrated into Canvas. So you can, when you're in the rich text editor and you go to the V, you'll have a H5P, which is all those kind of little quizzing activities. And you can use comments box and polls, and I'll probably be seeing you soon so I can show you how, if you like. Yeah.
Oh, this is so this is perhaps not, it's more of a, maybe this is not a question for this forum actually. So I'll hold off, I'll ask privately later. It's more about which Zoom workshops you would recommend, because there's a few going. I think there's one at 11:30 as well. And
yeah, so they're two different things, aren't they, Kevin? One's more about the kind of tech side of it, and one's, Kevin and Emily's, is more about the teaching side of it. So they both complement each other, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're definitely new to Zoom, you might consider attending the first session with the LX Lab staff. And then clinic number 3 that I mentioned earlier is Emily and I will be going through more about the teaching strategies and less so about the technical aspects of using Zoom for the first time. So you can kind of work out what's appropriate for you, but it will be run, as I mentioned, this afternoon, but again, next Thursday, that Zoom workshop.
Okay, thank you so much, and thanks for everything today. It's been really really stimulating.
Great. Yeah, and if you have any other questions later on, you know, this discussion forum is here and we'll monitor it, and if you want to, you can subscribe to it to see if there's anything going on in there. But yeah,
okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right,
I also want to say thank you. It's been fantastic, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we'll probably stay here for another few minutes. Everyone's free to go, but if you want to stay and ask some questions, we'll just hang about for another 10 minutes or so. And thanks for coming. And you'll get an email as well with the recording, and also you'll be enrolled in this site so that you can have a look at the examples in more detail. Yes, we will record and post this afternoon's Zoom teaching workshop. Yeah, we'll do.